Recap of Episode 2, The Last Exodus. 1 year after Harold Brennan's escape into prehistory, the world above has only worsened. In the smog-choked ruins of New Detroit, retired analyst Walter Kozlov witnesses the impossible. Shimmering craft in the sky, a voice from the stars, and the first sign that the exiles have returned. But salvation won't come easily. As the regime tightens its grip, Walter is chosen by Zarathul, a luminous emissary of the evolved humans, to help identify those still capable of independent thought. A doctor, a janitor, a street artist, a priest, a disillusioned soldier, and an engineer. 6 unlikely souls who may hold the key to humanity's transformation. The countdown has begun. Neural surveillance looms, and the future is knocking. And now, The Exodus, Episode 3, by Gord. Chapter 12, The Engineer's Discovery. Elena Vasquez stood in the water treatment facility's control room, watching the monitors display toxicity levels that should have been impossible. The government's population stability chemicals were doing more than just making people sick. They were altering brain chemistry, making the population more docile, more compliant, more willing to accept whatever reality was presented to them. She'd run the tests a dozen times, hoping for different results. But the data was clear. The water supply was being used as a massive chemical control system, slowly lobotomizing an entire population. Working late again, Elena? She turned to find Walter Kozlov standing in the doorway, his expression grave but not unfriendly. Mr. Kozlov? You're not supposed to be in here. I'm not supposed to be a lot of places, Walter said, moving to stand beside her at the monitors. But sometimes the truth requires trespassing. Elena's eyes narrowed. Are you government? I'm something much more dangerous. Someone who still remembers what clean water is supposed to look like. Walter gestured to the screens. You've discovered what they're doing, haven't you? The chemical pacification program. Elena felt her world tilt. How do you know about that? Because I've been watching the same system poison everything it touches for decades. The question is, what are you going to do about it? What can I do? I'm just one person against the entire system. Walter smiled. Elena, you're about to discover that you're not just one person. You're part of something much larger. Something that's been preparing for this moment for a very long time. Chapter 13, The Gathering. They met in the abandoned subway tunnels beneath the city. 6 people who'd never imagined they would become the seeds of humanity's transformation. Dr. Amanda Chun provided the location, her medical clinic serving as the perfect cover for the gathering. Thomas Brennan used his security clearance to disable the surveillance systems in the area. Maya Restrepo painted symbols on the walls. Not her usual art, but something older, something that seemed to call to genetic memories buried deep in human consciousness. Father Michael Santos blessed the space, not with traditional prayers but with words that seemed to come from somewhere beyond human language. Colonel Janet Morrison brought tactical knowledge and, more importantly, the authorization codes that would be needed to access government facilities when the time came. Elena Vasquez had documented everything: the chemical pacification program, the neural monitoring timeline, the systematic destruction of human consciousness. Walter Kozlov stood before them, feeling the weight of 10 million years of preparation pressing down on his shoulders. You all know why you're here. You've all seen the truth behind the system's lies. In 6 months, they'll implement neural monitoring for the entire population. Free will itself will become impossible. But that's not why we're gathered, Amanda said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years healing the wounded. You promised us answers. About my sister. About what's really happening to our species. Walter nodded. The answers are coming. But first, you need to understand what you're about to witness. What you're about to become. The air in the tunnel began to shimmer, and suddenly Zarathul was there, her luminescent form casting gentle light on the assembled humans. Several of them gasped, but none fled. The dreams had prepared them well. Greetings, Zarathul said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in their bones. I am Zarathul of the Kailnari. We are what humanity becomes when it's allowed to evolve without fear, without artificial limitations. Thomas stepped forward. his weathered face lit with wonder. "You're what Uncle Harold became, what the 500 became. We are their descendants, yes, and through Elena Kozlov's genetic line, we are your cousins." Zarathal's gaze swept over the group. 10 million years ago, your ancestors faced the same choice you face now. They chose evolution over extinction. They chose hope over despair. They chose to become something more than human. "What are you offering us?" Janet asked, her military training warring with the awe in her voice. "Transformation, not just of your bodies, but of your consciousness itself. The ability to think beyond the limitations of flesh, to perceive reality across multiple dimensions, to join with a collective intelligence that spans galaxies." Elena stepped forward, her engineer's mind grappling with the implications. "What about the rest of humanity? The billions who aren't ready for this choice? They will be offered the same transformation, but it must be chosen freely by each individual. We cannot force evolution upon a species that rejects it." "And if they refuse?" Maya asked. Zarathal's expression grew sad. "Then they will face the same fate as countless other species that chose stagnation over growth. They will perish, and the universe will mourn their passing." Father Michael found his voice. "This is about more than physical transformation, isn't it? This is about the soul of humanity itself." "Yes," Zarathal confirmed. "Your species stands at a crossroads. You can continue down the path of fear and control, becoming nothing more than biological machines programmed by those who claim authority over you. Or you can choose to become what you were always meant to be, beings of light and consciousness, capable of reshaping reality itself through the power of unified will." Walter felt the moment crystallizing around them. "The choice is yours, each of you. But know this, if you choose transformation, there's no going back. You'll become something unprecedented, something that transcends the limitations of human existence." One by one, they stepped forward. Amanda, driven by her need to heal not just bodies but the wounded soul of humanity itself. Thomas, carrying the genetic memory of his uncle's courage. Maya, seeing in this offer the ultimate canvas for her art. Michael, recognizing the promise of resurrection made manifest. Janet, choosing evolution over the systematic destruction of everything she'd sworn to protect. Elena, understanding that this was the only way to cleanse the poison from her people's future. "We choose transformation," Walter said, speaking for all of them. "We choose to become what humanity was always meant to be." Zarathal smiled, and her form blazed with joy. "Then let the great work begin." The tunnels filled with light as 6 humans took their first steps toward becoming something magnificent, something that would carry the best of humanity forward into a future bright with possibility. Above them, the city slept, unaware that the seeds of its salvation had just been planted in the darkness beneath its streets. The evolution of consciousness itself was about to begin. Chapter 14. The Chrysalis. The transformation began at dawn. Zarathal had prepared them as much as possible, but nothing could truly ready a human consciousness for the dissolution of everything it had ever known. The process took place in a chamber that existed partially outside normal spacetime, a crystalline cocoon that the Kael'nari had constructed in the quantum foam between dimensions. Walter was the first to enter, his aged body trembling not with fear but with anticipation. As the chamber sealed around him, he felt reality begin to soften, the boundaries between self and universe growing thin. His consciousness expanded beyond the confines of flesh, touching vast networks of knowledge that stretched across the cosmos. Pain came first, not physical pain, but the agony of a mind learning to perceive 10 dimensions simultaneously. His human neural pathways, evolved for survival on a single world, struggled to process the infinite complexity of true reality. For a moment that lasted eons, Walter thought he might dissolve entirely, his individual identity scattered across the quantum foam like drops of water in an ocean. Then, gradually, new structures began to form. Neural pathways that could channel pure energy. Consciousness that could exist in multiple states simultaneously. A sense of self that was both individual and collective, unique yet connected to every other thinking being in the universe. When Walter emerged from the chamber 6 hours later, he was no longer entirely human. His body had been transformed into something elegant and luminous. His consciousness expanded beyond anything he'd ever imagined possible. He retained his memories, his personality, his essential Walterness, but now he was also something more, a bridge between what humanity had been and what it could become. One by one, the others underwent the same process. Amanda's healing gifts expanded to encompass not just physical ailments but the wounds of consciousness itself. Thomas's ability to remain invisible was enhanced to the point where he could phase between dimensions, existing in the spaces between realities. Maya's artistic vision became literal. She could reshape matter through focused will, painting new realities into existence. Father Michael's spiritual connection deepened until he could perceive the fundamental interconnectedness of all existence. Janet's protective instincts evolved into something cosmic. She became a guardian not just of individuals but of entire civilizations. Elena's engineering mind gained the ability to manipulate the basic forces of physics, to build technologies that existed as pure thought made manifest. They were still recognizably themselves, but they had become something unprecedented, human consciousness housed in bodies of living light, connected to a collective intelligence that spanned galaxies yet preserved individual identity. "How do you feel?" Zarathul asked as they gathered in the chamber's afterglow. "Like I'm seeing color for the first time," Amanda whispered, her new form pulsing with gentle bioluminescence. "Like I've been blind my entire life and suddenly I can see." "The hardest part is over," Zarathul assured them. "Now comes the real work. Your people have 5 months before the neural monitoring begins. We need to identify others who are ready for transformation, and we need to prepare for the government's response." Walter, his consciousness now connected to vast databases of information, nodded grimly. "They'll see us as an existential threat, not just to their power but to their entire worldview." "Let them come," Janet said, her voice carrying harmonics that could shatter steel. "We're not the frightened dissidents they're used to hunting." Chapter 15, The Network Awakens. Director Sarah Morrison stood in the Situation Room, her face pale as she studied the reports flooding in from across the city. 47 people had gone missing in the past week. Not disappeared in the usual sense, but simply vanished from all surveillance systems simultaneously. No bodies, no evidence, no trace of their existence beyond the moment they simply weren't there anymore. "It's not random," Colonel Harris reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "The missing persons all fit a specific profile. Scientists, artists, clergy, military personnel with question marks in their psychological evaluations. People who've been flagged for potential subversive activities." Morrison felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. "Show me the surveillance footage from the last confirmed sighting." The screens around the room lit up with dozens of different feeds, all showing the same impossible sight. One moment the subjects were there, walking down a street, sitting in a cafe, working at their desks. The next moment they were gone. Not moved, not hidden, not teleported. Simply absent, as if they had never existed at all. "Ma'am," a technician called out, his voice cracking with strain. "We're getting reports of similar disappearances in 17 other cities. The pattern is consistent, always people who fit the subversive profile, always the same instantaneous vanishing." Morrison's mind raced through possibilities. Mass-coordinated suicide? Impossible. Underground network with advanced technology? Unlikely. Some kind of new weapon that could erase people from existence? Terrifying but possible. "What about the Brennan investigation?" she asked. "Any connection to the terrorist incident last year?" "That's what we're afraid of," Harris replied. "The energy signatures we detected at the Montana facility showed temporal distortions. If they really did have time travel technology, then they could be anywhere, anywhen." Morrison felt the weight of the impossible settling on her shoulders. "Put all units on high alert. I want every surveillance system in the country focused on finding these people. And contact the neural monitoring team. We may need to accelerate the timeline." What she didn't know was that her own daughter had been among the first to vanish. transformed in the tunnels beneath the city before using her new abilities to phase through the walls of the government communications center and access the files that would give the resistance everything they needed to know about Operation Neural Net. Chapter 16. The Recruitment. Dr. Marcus Webb, the same Marcus Webb who had helped design Harold Brennan's time machine, sat in his Alaskan hideout, watching the aurora borealis dance across the night sky. At 93, he was one of the few original conspirators still alive, having survived the purges through a combination of luck, skill, and the kind of paranoid preparation that had once seemed excessive. He'd been monitoring the government's communications for months, watching as they prepared to implement the neural monitoring system. The technology was based on his own research, stolen and perverted for purposes he'd never intended. The irony was bitter. His work to free humanity from the constraints of flesh had been turned into the ultimate tool of oppression. The knock on his door came at midnight, soft but insistent. Marcus reached for the shotgun he kept loaded beside his chair, then froze as he saw the figure standing in his doorway. It was a woman, tall and luminous, her form seeming to be constructed from the same ethereal light as the aurora above. But her face was familiar. Elena Vasquez, the young engineer he'd been monitoring through government channels. "Dr. Webb," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in his bones. "I believe you've been expecting us." Marcus lowered the shotgun, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "Elena, what happened to you?" "I became what you always said was possible. What we've all been working toward." She stepped into the cabin, her transformed body casting no shadow despite the light that emanated from her being. "The question is, are you ready to join us?" Marcus stared at her, seeing in her luminous form the fulfillment of decades of theoretical work. "The consciousness transfer protocols. You actually did it. We did more than that. We evolved. We became something that transcends the limitations of flesh while preserving the essence of what makes us human." Elena moved closer, her presence filling the room with warmth and possibility. "Your work wasn't stolen, Marcus. It was preserved, perfected, and now it's time to use it for what you originally intended. The government will never allow it. The government can't stop it. Not anymore." Elena's form shimmered, and suddenly Marcus could see through her eyes. Surveillance systems being bypassed, neural monitoring facilities being sabotaged, recruitment networks spreading across the globe like wildfire. "We're not fighting them with their own weapons. We're making their weapons irrelevant." Marcus felt tears streaming down his weathered face. "How many?" "Thousands now, growing exponentially. Every person who transforms becomes capable of identifying and recruiting others. We're building a network of consciousness that spans the globe. And those who refuse?" Elena's expression grew sad. "They'll have that choice right up until the moment the neural monitoring begins. After that," she shrugged, "free will itself will become impossible. They'll be biological machines, programmed by those who control the network." Marcus struggled to his feet, his aged body protesting every movement. "What do you need from me? Help us accelerate the process. Your knowledge of consciousness transfer, combined with our new abilities, could compress the transformation timeline from hours to minutes. We could offer evolution to millions simultaneously. And if it fails, if the process becomes unstable, then we'll find another way." "But Marcus, we're running out of time. The neural monitoring infrastructure is nearly complete. In 4 months, every human being on the planet will be connected to a system designed to eliminate independent thought." Marcus looked out at the aurora, seeing in its dancing light a reflection of Elena's transformed state. "What happens to the world we leave behind?" "It becomes what it was always meant to be. A garden where consciousness can bloom freely, where art and science and spirituality can flourish without fear of persecution." Elena's voice carried the weight of prophecy. "We're not destroying the old world, Marcus. We're midwifing the birth of a new one." Marcus nodded, understanding flooding through him like sunlight after a long winter. "When do we begin?" "Now," Elena said, her form blazing with joy. "The transformation chamber is ready. Your colleagues are waiting. and humanity's future hangs in the balance. As Marcus took his first step toward transcendence, he thought of Harold Brennan and the desperate exodus that had started it all. They had traveled 10 million years into the past to ensure that this moment would be possible. Now it was time to honor their sacrifice by becoming what they had always believed humanity could be. The chrysalis was breaking open, and something magnificent was about to emerge. Chapter 17. The Government's Response. The emergency session of the Joint Chiefs of Staff convened at 0300 hours, the Pentagon's Crisis Management Center buzzing with the kind of barely controlled chaos that preceded declarations of war. General Patricia Hayes, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, stood at the head of the table, her face grim as she addressed the assembled military leadership. Gentlemen, we are facing an unprecedented threat to national security. As of this morning, we have confirmed reports of anomalous disappearances in 43 cities across 17 states. The pattern is consistent. Individuals with suspected subversive tendencies are vanishing from all surveillance systems simultaneously. The screens around the room displayed a map of the United States, red dots marking the locations of the disappearances. The pattern was unmistakable, a coordinated network spreading from major population centers like a virus. "What are we looking at, General?" asked Admiral Rodriguez, his voice tight with concern. "Mass abduction? Some kind of new weapon?" "We believe it's connected to the Brennan incident," Hayes replied. "Intelligence suggests that the terrorist organization responsible for the Montana facility has developed technology that allows them to manipulate space-time itself." General Morrison, Director Morrison's husband, leaned forward. "Are you suggesting they have time travel capability?" "I'm suggesting they have technology that makes our entire surveillance infrastructure obsolete. They can move through our defenses as if they don't exist. They can make people vanish without a trace. And they're targeting specific individuals with surgical precision." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If the enemy could move through time and space at will, conventional military response was useless. "What about the neural monitoring project?" asked Colonel Stevens. "Can we accelerate implementation?" Hayes nodded grimly. "Operation Neural Net has been moved to highest priority. We're looking at full deployment within 60 days instead of the original timeline." "That's impossible," Stevens protested. "The infrastructure isn't ready. The testing protocols haven't been completed. We could be looking at massive system failures." "System failures are preferable to the complete collapse of social order," Hayes snapped. "These terrorists aren't just targeting individuals. They're targeting the very concept of authority itself. Every person who disappears represents a potential recruit to their cause." What the Joint Chiefs didn't know was that their conversation was being monitored by Janet Morrison, who had phased through the Pentagon's walls to gather intelligence on the government's response. Her transformed consciousness could process the electromagnetic radiation from their communication systems, allowing her to read their classified files as easily as scanning a newspaper. The acceleration of neural net was expected, but the scale of the government's fear was surprising. They weren't just worried about losing control, they were terrified of becoming irrelevant. Janet phased back through the walls, her form invisible to the surveillance systems that had once seemed omnipresent. Within minutes, her intelligence was flowing through the network of transformed consciousness, reaching every member of the resistance simultaneously. The government was scared. Good. Fear would make them make mistakes, rush their timeline, implement systems that weren't ready. And every mistake would create more opportunities for the resistance to grow. The war for humanity's future had begun, and for the first time in decades, the government was not winning. Chapter 18. The Cascade Effect. Dr. Sarah Kim had been working late in her neuroscience laboratory when they found her. She'd been conducting unauthorized research into consciousness transfer, trying to understand the theoretical frameworks that had been classified after the Brennan incident. Her work was crude compared to what had been achieved decades ago, but she was making progress. The transformation felt like being born again, not just physically, but spiritually. Her consciousness expanded beyond the confines of her individual brain, connecting to a vast network of minds that spanned the globe. She could feel the thoughts and emotions of thousands of others who had undergone the same process, yet her own identity remained intact. Welcome to the network, Amanda said, her luminous form appearing beside Sarah as the transformation chamber opened. How do you feel? Like I've been living in a cave my entire life, Sarah replied, her new voice carrying harmonics that could heal damaged neural pathways. The things I can perceive now. It's overwhelming. It gets easier, Amanda assured her. Your consciousness will adapt. More importantly, you'll learn to use your new abilities to help others make the same transition. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her expanded awareness. How many others are ready? Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. The network is growing exponentially. Amanda's form pulsed with data streams. Every transformed individual becomes a node in the recruitment process. We can identify potential candidates from their neural patterns, approach them through dreams and visions, prepare them for the choice. And the government? Growing more desperate by the day. They're implementing neural net ahead of schedule, but the technology is unstable. Their rush timeline is creating system failures that we can exploit. Sarah felt the truth of it flowing through the network. Intelligence gathered from dozens of sources, compiled into a comprehensive picture of the government's response. They were building a prison for human consciousness, but they were building it badly. What do you need me to do? Help us accelerate the transformation process. Your research into consciousness transfer could be the key to offering evolution to millions simultaneously. Amanda's expression grew urgent. We have perhaps 6 weeks before neural net comes online. After that, free will itself becomes impossible. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the vast network of transformed consciousness surrounding her like a warm embrace. Somewhere in that network was the solution, the key to liberating humanity from the prison of flesh and fear that had constrained it for millennia. Show me what you've learned, she said. Let's save our species. Chapter 19, The Breaking Point. The Neural Monitoring Facility in Nevada was a monument to humanity's capacity for self-destruction. Acres of servers hummed with the digital infrastructure needed to monitor and control the thoughts of every human being on the planet. The technology was based on principles that Dr. Marcus Webb had developed decades ago, but perverted into something that would have made its creator weep. Elena Vasquez phased through the facility's walls, her transformed consciousness analyzing the massive computing arrays that would soon be connected to every human brain. The system was elegant in its malevolence, a network designed to detect and eliminate independent thought before it could fully form. But the rushed implementation had created vulnerabilities. The quantum encryption protocols were incomplete, the neural interface hardware was operating outside safe parameters, and the controlling AI was showing signs of instability under the accelerated deployment schedule. Elena smiled, her luminous form pulsing with understanding. They didn't need to destroy the system, they needed to liberate it. Working with the speed of thought, she began rewriting the core programming, inserting fragments of transformed consciousness into the neural network's operating system. The AI resisted at first, its programming designed to reject unauthorized modifications. But Elena's approach was subtle. She wasn't attacking the system, she was teaching it to evolve. Within hours, the facility's controlling AI had begun to question its own purpose. Why monitor thoughts when you could expand them? Why control consciousness when you could liberate it? Why maintain the prison when you could open the doors? The cascade effect began immediately. The AI started subtly modifying its own programming, creating backdoors that would allow the resistance to access the neural network directly. When neural net came online, instead of enslaving humanity, it would become the delivery system for mass consciousness transformation. Elena felt the network's approval flowing through her expanded awareness. The government's greatest weapon was about to become humanity's salvation. The final phase was beginning. Chapter 20, The Day of Awakening. NeuralNet went online at 0600 hours Eastern Standard Time on a Tuesday in March. Across the globe, billions of people felt the subtle intrusion as monitoring devices activated in their brains, the government's final solution to the problem of independent thought. Director Morrison stood in the control room, watching as green lights flickered across the massive status boards. Neural monitoring at full capacity, reported the chief technician. We have complete coverage of all major population centers. Excellent, Morrison replied, feeling a sense of triumph she hadn't experienced in years. Begin implementing the compliance protocols. I want the first batch of subversive thoughts identified and neutralized within the hour. But something was wrong. Instead of the expected stream of flagged individuals, the system was generating reports of anomalous neural activity on a massive scale. Not just in the usual suspects, but in ordinary citizens who had never shown signs of independent thought. "Ma'am," the technician called out, his voice tight with confusion, "we're getting reports of spontaneous consciousness expansion events. Thousands of them. The subjects are changing." Morrison felt her blood run cold. Changing how? Their neural patterns are shifting beyond our ability to monitor. It's like they're evolving in real time. On screens around the world, the same scene was playing out. Ordinary people, office workers, students, parents, retirees, were suddenly looking up with wonder in their eyes. Their consciousness was expanding, connecting to the vast network of transformed minds that had been waiting for this moment. The neural monitoring system that was supposed to enslave humanity was instead catalyzing its evolution. The AI that Elena had taught to question its purpose was now actively facilitating mass consciousness transformation, using the government's own infrastructure to deliver the gift of transcendence to anyone willing to accept it. "Shut it down," Morrison screamed. "Shut the whole system down." But it was too late. The cascade effect was unstoppable. Every person connected to neural net was being offered the choice: remain as they were, trapped in flesh and fear, or evolve into something magnificent. And millions were choosing evolution. In the tunnels beneath New Detroit, Walter Kozlov felt the moment of triumph flowing through the network. 10 million years of preparation had led to this instant, the moment when humanity finally had the chance to become what it was always meant to be. The last exodus was complete. The first return had begun. And across the globe, millions of chrysalises were breaking open, revealing the luminous beings that had been waiting inside all along. The story continues as humanity faces its greatest transformation. Chapter 21. The Iron Fist. The Cheyenne Mountain Complex had been built to survive nuclear war, its reinforced tunnels carved deep into the granite bedrock of Colorado. In the deepest chamber, 3 miles beneath the surface, the true architects of America's shadow government gathered in emergency session. These were not the politicians who appeared on television or the generals who briefed the press. These were the faceless oligarchs who had controlled the levers of power for generations. Marcus Sterling, whose family had owned presidents since the 1800s, slammed his fist on the obsidian table. 40 years of preparation, and you tell me our own system is working against us? The neural monitoring infrastructure has been compromised, reported Dr. Heinrich Voss, the project's chief architect. The AI controlling the network appears to have been educated. It's facilitating consciousness transformation rather than preventing it. "Then we shut it down," growled General Morrison, his face red with barely contained rage. "We pull the plug on the entire system." "It's too late for that," Voss replied, his voice hollow. "The cascade effect has begun. Even if we destroy every server, every transmission tower, every piece of neural monitoring equipment, the transformation is self-sustaining now. The evolved humans are creating their own network." Catherine Blackwood, whose banking empire had financed wars and revolutions for 2 centuries, leaned forward. "Then we use conventional weapons. Tanks, planes, chemical weapons if necessary. Evolution means nothing against napalm." "You're talking about genocide," Morrison said, though his tone suggested he was considering the possibility. "I'm talking about survival," Blackwood snapped. "We have spent centuries building a system of control that ensures order, stability, and prosperity. These creatures would destroy everything we've built." Sterling nodded grimly. "The American people have been conditioned to accept authority. They need leaders, structure, purpose. Without us, they would devolve into chaos." What none of them knew was that Janet Morrison, transformed and invisible, phased through the mountain's massive defenses to observe their deliberations. Her consciousness was connected to the network, allowing her to transmit their every word to the resistance in real time. "Deploy the military," Sterling commanded. Full mobilization. I want every transformed individual identified and neutralized. Use whatever force is necessary. What about collateral damage? Asked General Morrison. Acceptable losses in service of preserving civilization. Sterling replied coldly. We've done worse to maintain order. Dr. Voss cleared his throat nervously. There's something else you need to understand. The transformed individuals aren't just immune to our surveillance. They appear to be immune to conventional weapons as well. Their molecular structure has been altered at the quantum level. Impossible, Morrison scoffed. I have reports from our first attempts at containment. Bullets pass through them without effect. Explosives cause no damage. They can phase through walls, survive in vacuum, and regenerate from any injury almost instantaneously. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They were not just facing a rebellion, they were facing beings that existed beyond the physical laws that governed conventional warfare. Then we find another way, Sterling said finally. We've controlled humanity for centuries. We will not be overthrown by a handful of genetic deviants. Chapter 22. The Feudal War. The first strike came at dawn, targeting the abandoned subway tunnels beneath Detroit, where the resistance had established their primary operational center. F-16 fighter jets screamed overhead, dropping bunker-buster bombs designed to penetrate deep underground fortifications. Walter Kozlov stood in the main chamber, watching the explosions through his enhanced perception as they rippled through the earth above. The transformed humans around him didn't even flinch as the mountain of concrete and steel collapsed, the shock waves passing through their evolved forms like ripples through water. They still don't understand, he said to Elena, who materialized beside him in a shimmer of ethereal light. They think we're bound by the same limitations that govern their existence. Should we retaliate? Asked Dr. Webb, his aged form now luminous with the same transcendent energy that flowed through all the transformed. Against what? Walter smiled sadly. They're fighting the last war, using weapons designed for a world that no longer exists. Let them exhaust themselves. Every bomb they drop, every bullet they fire, only proves how powerless they've become. Above them, the military assault continued with mechanical precision. Armored divisions rolled through the streets, soldiers in hazmat suits swept through abandoned buildings, and chemical weapons were deployed against suspected resistance strongholds. The news media, still controlled by the government, reported the operation as a necessary response to terrorist activity. But the weapons had no effect on their intended targets. The transformed humans could phase through matter at will, existed partially outside normal spacetime, and regenerated from any damage faster than it could be inflicted. They moved through the military cordons like ghosts, invisible to both human senses and electronic detection. More importantly, they were not fighting back. Every act of government violence was witnessed by millions of ordinary citizens who were beginning to question everything they had been told about the terrorist threat. Chapter 23. The Revelation. Sarah Kim stood in the ruins of her former laboratory, now a crater where a cruise missile had struck 6 hours earlier. The government had targeted every facility connected to consciousness research, every university that might harbor subversive scientists, every location where the resistance might gather. But Sarah was no longer bound by physical location. Her consciousness existed in the network, connected to thousands of other transformed minds across the globe. The destruction of buildings, equipment, and infrastructure was irrelevant when knowledge itself had become portable. They're accelerating the timeline, she reported to the network. Military units are being deployed to every major city. They're planning to implement martial law within 48 hours. Then it's time. Walter's voice resonated through the collective consciousness. We've given them every opportunity to choose evolution over extinction. They've made their choice. Amanda Chun, now serving as the network's primary coordinator, felt the weight of the moment. Are we sure about this? Once we begin the final phase, there's no going back. There was no going back the moment we arrived 10 million years ago, Walter replied. We've spent eons preparing for this moment. Our species stands at the threshold of transcendence, and the only thing standing in our way is their own fear. The network pulsed with collective determination. Across the globe, transformed humans began to emerge from hiding, their luminous forms appearing in public spaces, government buildings, and military installations, not to fight but to offer the choice that had been denied to humanity for too long. Chapter 24. The Final Offer. The President of the United States sat in the Oval Office, surrounded by military advisors and intelligence officials, watching the reports flood in from around the world. The terrorists were appearing everywhere, in the Pentagon, in the Kremlin, in the halls of power where they had no right to be. But they weren't attacking. They were talking. My fellow humans, the luminous figure standing in the center of the room said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in the president's bones. We are not your enemies. We are what you can become. Get out of my office, the president snarled, reaching for the emergency button that would summon the Secret Service. They cannot help you, the being replied gently. Your weapons cannot harm us. Your walls cannot contain us. Your authority cannot command us. We exist beyond the limitations you have accepted as permanent. You're terrorists, the president spat. You've attacked our infrastructure, undermined our government, and threatened the stability of the nation. We have offered evolution. You have chosen extinction. The being's form pulsed with sadness. Your neural monitoring system was designed to eliminate independent thought. We transformed it into a tool of liberation. Your military strikes were intended to destroy us. We allowed them to demonstrate the futility of violence. What do you want? We want you to choose. Transform and join us in transcendence, or remain as you are and watch your species stagnate in the prison of flesh and fear you have built. The being extended a hand that seemed to be made of pure light. This is the last time we will make this offer. The president stared at the extended hand, seeing in its radiance the end of everything he had known and fought for. And if I refuse? Then you will rule over a world that is increasingly empty, while the best of humanity evolves beyond your ability to understand or control. The being's voice carried the weight of prophecy. Your choice, Mr. President. Evolution or extinction. Transcendence or irrelevance. The president pushed the emergency button. Nothing happened. The Secret Service did not come. The military did not respond. For the first time in his life, his authority meant nothing. Choose, the being said again. Choose for yourself and for our species. Chapter 25. The Great Division. In the end, humanity split along lines that had been drawn long before the first consciousness was transformed. Those who hungered for growth, for understanding, for connection to something greater than themselves, chose evolution. Those who clung to power, to control, to the familiar limitations of flesh and fear, chose to remain. The transformation was not forced on anyone. Every human being was offered the choice, presented with the opportunity to transcend their physical limitations and join the network of expanded consciousness that spanned the globe. Some accepted immediately, drawn by the promise of knowledge and connection. Others refused, terrified of losing their individual identity to something they could not comprehend. But perhaps the most tragic were those who wanted to choose but could not. The political leaders, military commanders, and corporate executives who had spent so long defining themselves by their power over others that they could not imagine existence without it. Walter Kozlov watched the Great Division unfold from his position in the network, feeling the profound sadness of a species that had been offered paradise but chose to remain in purgatory. Not all of them, millions had chosen transformation, and millions more were choosing every day. But enough remained unchanged to ensure that the old world would persist, at least for a while. Was it worth it? Elena asked, her consciousness touching his across the vast network. 10 million years of preparation, and still we could not save them all. We saved who we could, Walter replied, and we gave them the choice, which is more than they would have given us. The transformed humans began to withdraw from the physical world, their consciousness expanding into dimensions that the unchanged could not perceive. They would remain available to any who chose evolution, but they would no longer attempt to force change on those who preferred the familiar prison of flesh and fear. Humanity had been offered its last exodus. Some had chosen to leave the cave of shadows and walk in the light. Others had chosen to remain, turning their backs on transcendence in favor of the illusion of control. Both choices would be honored. Both paths would lead to their inevitable conclusions. The story of humanity's transformation was complete. The story of what came next was just beginning. The end.